everybody. This is a new room for us to be in. I feel like I'm a teacher again. But just so you know, because they're doing the voting there, they're moving here. The light's going down a little bit because of the thing, but is it okay for everybody? Can you see okay? You're doing okay? All right. All right. So we're going to talk about American Indians in early Shakopee. And I'm just picking out some. There are a lot, and there are a lot of really interesting stories. There's a lot of stories. But, so I just kind of pick a few here and there because, again, the time and stuff. But I do want you to understand the meaning of the name of this topic. And you can see how the word actually is actually spelled or said like this, okay? Notice how I'm making you doing it as opposed to me. So you know, because I have my stroke, I have a really hard time with that kind of stuff. But I see it, I know what it is. But basically the idea is that we are all relatives, okay? And that includes the Dakota, but all people, plant life, animal lives, and all things of the earth. So that's what we talk about the thing. But we're going to specifically focus specifically on mostly Dakota Indians. And then I just wanted to get a little thing of where we are. This is the Minnesota River here, right? And you're aware of that, okay. And just so you know, this is where is now the Shakopee Metawakan Sioux community, which is down over here, okay? But Tinta Otanwa, which is Chief Shakopee's village, was over here, and I'll talk a little more about where it was. But that's the Pond Mission. And you notice all these round things along here? Those are all mounds. And in fact, this whole area, there's about 101 mounds, which were burying place for Dakota Indians and other Indians before that. There were a lot. If you look now, you go to Memorial Park, you'll see one big mound, right? And you see this kind of, now it's left as prairie. I remember that mound from when I was younger. I also remember that there were several others in Memorial Park. They're still there, they've just been leveled, but they're still around. But what I remember is I was, I think, 12 years old, and you know how they do sometimes. I was picked to be something. I don't know what it was, I still don't remember, but I did find the article, but now I couldn't find it when I was putting this together. But anyway, I had to go, and on the mound that was there, at that time, it was not prairie. It was actually a regular mound, and on the top was a flagpole. And I remember at 12 years old going there, and I had to go on top, and I don't know if I had to speak or do something. But I remember afterwards thinking, I think this is kind of wrong. We're on somebody's grave. You know, why are we, you know, and eventually they figured that out here. As you know, they moved the flag, and they now it's prairie and stuff. But it's just kind of interesting that there are so many mounds that are around and still around. If you look at where Perkins is in downtown Shakopee, that's where a mound was. Right next to it, where the hotel there, that was a mound. So just so you know, there were a lot, and a lot of them were just bowled over to use. Now there's laws that prevent that to happen, but in the past it wasn't so the same way. And the other thing about the Dakota especially is that they tend to leave a gift, often tobacco, in a prayer when they took from the land. It was kind of a reciprocity thing. And they always end their thing with for all our relatives. You know, when we talk about tobacco, it's not tobacco like you get from whatever tobacco company is. I don't smoke, so I don't know. But anyway, it's not that. It's actually from leaves. There's several things that you put in to make the thing. So just so again, here again is Thaóyate, the pond mounds, and the pond mission. And just to go further, I just want to know that here's Eagle Creek, you know, and that's part of Shakopee too, right? Okay, as it goes along the river. And again, there's a village there also. So I just want you to know that there were a lot of villages all along the way.
See those mounds on the other
Yeah.
side of the river? Are
Yeah.
they there now, or did they switch them too?
Half and half. Well, actually, more than this, probably 1/8 are still around, or so. And there's a lot of discussion about that, even now, and they still have problems with that. Some of it are on people's land, where like farmers, and they just have, they bought the land in 1853 or 54, and it didn't matter, they could just use it. Eventually, once they realized if something's grave, there a change happened, but it was much more recent. So just so you know, when you talk about, you know, here's Flying Cloud Drive, here's the Minnesota River. So I just want you to know that Thaóyate, the town that was here in Shakopee before it became Shakopee, in about 1823, they believe it was over on this side of the river, okay, on, in other words, the north side of the river. And then starting in 1839, sorry, they went to the south side of the river. Here's Memorial Park, and basically it was here, but you know, what they also found is that they tend to move around. And when I talked to Leonard Wabasha, he's the 8th generation of Wabasha, Chief Wabasha number 8. And he told me that this, although this was a place, at one point, it probably was here at the Amazon facility here, probably was where Thaóyate was for a while. It was probably a little bit further that way for a while. In other words, it moved around a little bit throughout the time. And they said they used to do it every so many years in order to help the land to continue to grow. And so just so you know, they know that there was always the cornfields and the gardens were here as the river goes around this way. And over here is the battlefield that happened in 1858 with the Ojibwa and the Dakota. And that battlefield is not in Shakopee, even though it's called the Shakopee battlefield, right? But it's mostly because the people who used to sit over here and watched it from over there in 1858, which was the last one that happened. And then I just want to, another thing to know. So here's what it actually, a village, this is the village of Thaóyate. And this was done in 1854, drawn. And this is actually Shakopee. So you can see in the background, see some of the houses that are there? Okay, and then you have the village here. And then it continues on, and then you have the log houses that are there also. Okay. They used to do a lot less of the teepees. They tend to not do that in the during the summertime. This was tend to be something during the winter. But because this was 1854, they moved around a little bit more, and that's why you still see more teepees at this time. And just another drawing from back then. This is probably, they think it's probably about 1853 or 1854. And it's just that basically the prairie, which is now Pearson Elementary School or whatever it was, and all the other things were all in this whole area, but they used to have a lot of lacrosse that would happen even back then. So it's just nice that someone actually drew a picture, so we have evidence of this happening right here in what later became Shakopee. And this is what normally the houses that look like this, more likely, as opposed to the teepees. But they tend to be a little bit of both in there. All right. So, we'll start with some of the people. So we start with the Shakpe dynasty is what they call it, okay? And it's basically Shakpe 1, Shakpe 2, and little 6, okay? And those who are the grandfather, son, and grandson. Although 2 of the 3 might have been adopted. So Chief Shakpe 1, he was born in 1750 and died in 1827. That's not a picture of him, by the way. There's not a picture of him, obviously. Okay. But they say that his name was given to him when his wife, who was White Buffalo Woman, gave birth to 6 couplet boys. So that's why Shakopee, S-A-K-P-E, means 6, the number 6 in Dakota. And that's why, and then it was just passed on from there. Now, I don't have evidence of that, except it's what's been passed along. So I believe it probably is true, and it's definitely true that they were all called Shakopee. And we know about him in terms of in Western writing because Stephen Long was here in 1817. He met him there. This whole discussion with that, so just so you know. Now what's interesting is how he died. In June of 1827, the Dakota and the Ojibwa were camped at Fort Snelling, okay? And during the night, 5 Dakota Indians, I want to say 6, but I believe there were 5, slipped in and shot some Ojibwa. 2 were killed and 3 were wounded, okay? And because of that, there's a lot of discussion, and the agreement was an eye for an eye. So you killed somebody or hurt somebody, you get the same amount back. So basically, they had to turn over, yeah, it is 5. There were 5 Dakotas, Indian, who had to then brought over, and they did what was called the gauntlet, okay? And one of them was Chief Shakpe 1, okay? So understand what they do is they all stand around with rifles all along, right? And they are in the middle, and they have to run from here to there. If they get there, they're fine, they're alive. They can continue, but mostly on the way, they die, you know, okay? And the women are around, they're all watching this whole thing as it happens. And this woman, Charlotte, Wisconsin, look how it's spelled, Van Cleve, was a child in Fort Snelling. And she remembers this story, and there's actually a book by her where she talks about what she remembered back then. And one part is talking about what happened with him. And they said that he darted out from the blue-coated ranks of the soldiers almost before the children moved. The rifles cracked, smoke cleared. There was a roar of delight of the Dakota because Shakpe 1 was still running. So they all shot, he's still running, right? So they're like, yeah, it's working, he's gonna make it. So people were clapping the children and stuff because they had done all of their rifles. They have to reload, you know, and that takes a little while, right? So they were reloading, and he was about 10 paces from the goal when the rifles cracked again. The children hid their faces. His body had jerked in the air. And when the dust cleared, he was lying on the ground, and he had fallen. And so he had died. Okay. Now, it's not necessary that Chief Shakpe 1 did it, was the person who shot the Ojibwa before. They just picked 5 people. So just so you know that too. It's kind of interesting to know. And she said that before children who had been watching with their parents wept where their friend was dead. And apparently they really liked him. And they said that night the bodies of the Dakota men were dropped from the bluff into the river. And I don't know that part, how true it is, or if he was buried at some point or not, but this is what she wrote about this. Okay, so that was Shakopee 1. This is Chief Shakopee 2. Okay, and that actually is a photo, that is him. Okay. Why is he so important? The name of Shakopee is named after this guy. Not number 1, not number 3, but number 2, okay? And Samuel Pond, as you are familiar with, he was a missionary. He came here, he worked with the Dakota. Samuel's so important because he's the one who really started a dictionary of Dakota words and document that information so that they could then pass along and be able to read in Dakota. But he says that Shakopee too was a man of good sense, sound judgment, and of some note among the Indians for his ability as an orator. When he took his stand in the early evening between his two villages and commenced to speak, he was always listened to with marked attention. And people, the white people who were moving into Shakopee liked him because he was, for the most part, willing to let them be, okay? And as opposed to get rid of them completely. And so he is a good person. Now, somebody probably has a thing with it somewhere. Oh, here it is. So just so you know, in case that's him. And there's a little information behind about that too, if you want to look at that later. And just so you know, there is a statue of him at the Shakopee High School. There's a statue of him. Next to it is who? Samuel Pond, because the two of them works together. Okay? So just so you know, and if you go to the high school, as you walk in, it should be right there on the right. Okay.
And then downtown Shakopee, is that the
Now,
center?
just a minute.
That's
Good
right.
question.
Well, that's
So
great.
she was talking about, she said downtown there's a statue too, right?
But it's not.
That's not number 2, that's number 3.
Okay.
Okay? And that, I made that mistake too, until I finally found it. Then, you know, you have to ask all the things to make sure you do the right thing. So I'll tell you in a minute. But okay, so he's called Little Six, is actually the translation of him, because he's the son of, he's actually was adopted from behind, so just, but that, I don't know if that's really important. But that is what he looks like. That is the picture of him. It's a drawing, actually. It was very nice, I thought so too. And the thing that's, you know, Shakopee, our Little Six, is important for the Dakota. At the same time, some people feel that the U.S.-Dakota War he was very much involved in it. And there's a lot of discussion still ongoing about whether he was a good person or a bad person, where he was. He's probably somewhere in the middle. But I do know that I read this article not too long ago that said that if Abraham Lincoln was still alive, it was 4 months after he died when they got him. And had he been around, he would have probably not have him be killed. But he wasn't there. And so he was kept killed. But they said that there's really the evidence, you have to have some kind of evidence if you're going to do it. And he'd tend to say things, like if they ask, oh yeah, I killed all kinds of, he would say that, But it was kind of a bragging thing that you do, you know, just, oh yeah, I killed this, but that guy, yeah, sure, you know. But the reality was it wasn't necessarily a lot of evidence of that. We do know that he went up to, when it was happening, he ended up going up to Canada. He was there, someone who was from here in Shakopee went up there illegally, actually, because you're going across the border. He got him drunk and then brought him back. And then he was tried and hung.
Separate from the people coming?
Separate, yeah. He was in 1865 because he was gone. He was up there with that at that time. And there, the statue that's downtown is Little Six. And so again, like you said, I didn't know that. I really thought this was Ŝakpe too because you know it's the name of the town and whatever. But this it was the third one that this stuff. And if you go to the casino, for example, there's a Little Six bingo place. I don't know what you call it. There, right, and stuff like that. So he is an important person and important for the history. Now in fact.
Do you know why they chose to put him in Ŝakpe instead of?
Yeah, well, because when they first were interested in having a statue downtown, they asked at the Ŝakpe Metawakan Sioux community, and they said, well, we have one in storage, and we're willing to give you that, and we'll actually pay $50,000 to have it brought back to the person who's a Native American. He's going to fix it up again, and then we'll bring it here. So they agreed to pay for everything to have it. So that's why it's there. And because he is an important part of the history of Shakopee, it just wasn't the same Shakopee that the name of the town was named after. Okay, and this is Little Crow. Notice how I am really good at avoiding saying anybody's name. That's just really me because, and again, I had a stroke. I have a hard time remembering the right things, even when I hear it. So, Little Crow was the chief of Metawakan Dakota people. He wasn't here in Shakopee. It's interesting because his name translated into his Red Nation, but he was known as Little Crow because of his grandmother's name, okay, which had been mistranslated by the whites to Little Crow. But the reason I bring him in, even though he's not from Shakopee, he used to camp when they were going to St. Paul and back. He used to camp on the vacant prairie opposite the Faribault trading post in the area called Shakopee. You know where the Faribault trading post was located? So it would be downtown. You know where Memorial Park is? Right across the street. And there's a sign there that's for the Pond Mission. And then right over to the other side, on the other side of the creek there, which is Faribault Springs, right there is where they lived, the Faribault family. They were here since 1844. 1847, the Pond family were here. And before either of those, the Dakota were here since about 1690. Okay? So it's just interesting that they often were there. And I know that they even said Sarah, who was the son of Oliver Faribault and Wakiyanka, said that he was very fond of him and said he was always honest. And Sarah Irene Faribault also, she said, Little Crow was often at our house and was much loved by us children. He used to bring us candy and maple sugar. That's really why they liked him, really. And so it's just interesting finding some information about Sarah Irene Faribault, who's one of 4 girls who lived at the Faribault cabin. The cabin is now at the landing, but it was there, and they actually lived there through 1949, right there. And then it was still there. They just built another place there. And that house was there until 1969, and then it moved to the landing. And if you go to the landing, they talk about the fur trade. That's really that cabin. So it's been around from 1844. And Sarah also mentioned a thing. She wanted to say that the Indians do not understand the white man's way. Understand that Sarah is actually part Indian. Her mother was full Dakota Indian. His father was 1/4 Dakota Indian. Okay? But she says that Indians do not understand the white man's way. When the white man had a big storehouse full of goods belonging to the Indians, and the Indian was cold and hungry, he could not see why he could not have what was there belonging to him, if it would keep him warm and fed him. And that was really kind of the view that was back and forth that ended up causing, the U.S. Dakota War. Now, we'll go to the next person we have here. This is Lucy. They call her Lucy, but it's actually Hopstina. And then that long middle name there, also known as Black Flute or Lucy Otherday. And many people used to remember, in the past, probably not you guys, but before then, used to remember her. She ended up being, she was with a cane, and she used to walk down to Faribault Springs. Lucy's mother was the sister of Chief Shakopee too, so that's where the connection goes. You also want to understand that Lucy's great grandson is now the head of the Shakopee Metawakan Sioux community. So that's kind of interesting.
And what's his name? Charlie?
Charlie, yeah. So if they're all, isn't that interesting how they're timing? I think that's just kind of interesting to that. And the other day, Lucy married James Otherday. And Otherday was a person who, his brother actually, I think, saved 62 white people during the U.S. Dakota War and helped get them to freedom. Okay? And they had 2 daughters, Minnie, and people often talk about Minnie Otherday. We used to call them Indian Minnie, I think they used to call them, okay, in there. And they used to make her way down Ŝakpe, and they used to, she couldn't see Lucy, she used kind of a walking stick. And she would gather food from the tinta, or the prairie, like berries and bulbs and stuff like that. And they'd also get watercress, which grew in the springs. And they used that, they used to sell those to people here in Shakopee.
There are many people in Ŝakpe, my husband, that remember trying to go down and get watercress, and Minnie, oh boy, she'd get after him. Did somebody say?
Actually, this wasn't Minnie.
It wasn't me?
It was, I'll tell you who ended up coming up, but I agree with that.
Oh.
It is true.
Oh,
Minnie
okay.
was around,
Oh, but it wasn't.
but she wasn't a problem. Well, I don't think with that part. My understanding is no. She was married. Minnie was much more rich. She was making moccasins and stuff that were sold for $1 and stuff like that. People really loved her. The one you're talking about is Grace Faribault. Manaige. And I'll tell you about her in a second. What's that? Where is it? So again, if you go, let me see. You know where Dangerfields is? Downtown? Right across the way and just over to the left. Not too far, you can see it there. And there's actually now, there's where it's now becoming trail. We have 3 of the 10 signs are up there now. Let's talk about the history of Shakopee. And eventually there's going to be a kiosk, 3 kiosks that will talk about the Farrell family, the Pond family, and the Dakota. So that will all be in that area. Eventually those same signs and other things like that are going to move towards into downtown Shakopee also.
Thank you. Could you see?
Yeah.
Charlie Vegas from Lucy Underneath?
Yes. Lucy's daughter was Minnie,
Okay.
and then it was, I believe, 1, 2, 3 was hit. Now I have to find exactly in my head it's not exactly. I think it's 2 down from Minnie is Charlie, but it might be 3. So that's why I kind of hate to say that if I'm wrong. But yes, he is definitely, I believe it's his great-great-grandmother was Minnie. So his great-great-great-grandmother would be Lucy. Okay? So that's why it's kind of interesting because that connection, we don't know that how that's worked. I didn't even know either until I started reading it. I was like, oh, that's the same one as, that kind of stuff. So it is kind of fun to know that. All right. So here's the other one we just talked about. This is Grace Parable Manaige, okay? I kind of like, she just makes me laugh, because she makes me laugh. She was born, I think, in 1876. Now, there's a couple things that happened here. One is this, that Grace was planning to marry, okay? She had a fiance and everything. But she went to South Dakota to be with her sister during the birth of their child, okay? It was an awful delivery. It was there. Remember, this is a long time ago, right? So it's probably in the late 1800s, okay? They had a difficult delivery, and the baby came out breech, and they couldn't be turned. In order to save Isabel, the doctors cut off an extremity of the baby, and the baby died. Awful, really, when you think about it.
That's all
Okay.
we can do.
But that's not right. And remember back then. But what's interesting is Grace returned home, broke up the relationship, and said, I would never go through that for a man. So I kind of like that about her. But she is also, like you said, here's Isabel and Grace here in the picture.
What year did Grace die?
I don't have it in here, I think, but I'll let you know that. But when she was about 80 years old, she did not like to have people, like this one, who went to the spring to steal the watercress. Because they had some nice watercress there. They don't have that anymore, unfortunately. I remember the story about that. But she used to gather it and sold it in town, but people would go and try to get it. So she would start swearing. And she took out a pistol. This is true. And she said, get off my land or you will be dead. And that happened to you, right? Yeah. So that's not Minnie. So just so you know, that's Grace is the one. And that is a true story because her great niece, great Grace niece, was 86 years old. The number's not quite exactly, but it's about that. She's the one who told me the story. She said it was true. She remembered it.
So when you went back, when was Grace born?
1876.
Yeah, that's right. So there she was 80.
Yeah.
Stubborn.
She was. She was stubborn, but she was there and she lived her whole life. I do have more information about that. I remember. And then, of course, we have Minnie. And Minnie, again, is the daughter of Lucy that we just talked about. Okay? She was born in 1877. And she was born in a teepee.
Excuse me?
Yep. At least it's not a Grace after, yes. All right, so she was born in a teepee on the north side of Minnesota River. And just so you know, with the Minnesota River and like Memorial Park, on the other side and further there is actually Eden Prairie area. But it's interesting because if you look at census, sometimes they will be in Shakopee and sometimes they'll be in Eden Prairie, even the same year. So they need come from twice probably, whatever. But she would come into Shakopee all the time, but she was on the other side of the river, just so you know. And again, like I said, everybody know Minnie because she, as Mary Du Bois said, she said, who made beautiful beaded articles. Purses mother had her made were not leather, but were made from rubber inner tubes. They had beaded handles and rubber streamers decorated with beads. The price was $1 each. And that's actually a picture of them too. Now what's sick is that, don't you wish you had those? Because that was worth a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just kind of interesting of that, what happened. And that was very common. And he was married to Charlie Weldon, and he was a fisherman for the most part. And then there's their first 2 children on this picture. So, now another person that we have is Wankan, and I think we've talked a little bit about her before. She was born probably in 1817 or so, and she died in 1880. She is the person who married Oliver Faribault and moved into Shakopee in 1844. But they believe she was probably born in this area and was actually, she was a Dakota Indian. Her name actually is woman who sits at the high place. And that's kind of where her Faribault trading post was, up on kind of a hill area. And it's just kind of interesting that some people say she's half Dakota, and some say she's full Dakota. But if I ask the family members still, I've talked to them, they think she was full Dakota. That she used to say that she was half at one time in order to get script at that time, okay? But they married first in this civil or Indian ceremony, and then eventually they married. And then sometimes they called her sometimes Harriet, but for the most part, she mostly just spoke Dakota, and she used to, and her name was Wankan. And they had 9 children, but 4 of them ended up living in the cabin. The others either were later and died, or had moved to other places. And this is what the cabin looks like now in the landing. And that's really what it looked like in 1844 also, except it wasn't in color. And she died from typhoid fever in 1880. And what's kind of interesting about her is that she used to say this prayer so often, and then it was passed on from generation to generation to generation. So they all say it. When I talked to the woman, she talks about this, and she still remembers saying the song. But basically what it says is, your grandmother is listening to you. Pray to her, she's listening to you. Which is a great, actually, thing to say, but she did it, of course, in Dakota. Okay, so we do know that Oliver and Yankee had 4 girls who lived in the cabin here in Shakopee, and one of them was Eliza. Okay. And you can see, just by looking, she is at least partly Dakota by her looks too. She was born in 1845 and died in 1936. And she was the sixth of 9 children that they had. And they grew up, Eliza really grew up with her 3 sisters, Mary, Josephine, which was called Jessie, Jane, Luce, and Sarah. And it's interesting because she also remembers that they used to have the Red River carts. That you've heard about that in the history of Minnesota. The Red River carts came from northern Minnesota and maybe a little bit of North Dakota and Canada, and they would come all the way down and then come to St. Paul. And they would bring all of their furs, which they sold, and then they moved back on. But both times they would stop at Faribault Springs, where we were just talking about, and they would camp. Okay? And she remembers them watching the procession of ponies with packs strapped on their backs for long dog trains. Okay? And then eventually it became ponies instead of dogs, but they still do. And she remembers the ears-piercing squeaks of the poorly lubricated wooden axles that had the approach of the train. So they used to hear that, back in the 1800s, early 1800s here. And here, when they're older, here is Eliza and her husband, Charlie, Manaige. And I'll talk about him in a little bit. But first I want to talk about William Lewis Bill Quinn. Remember, we talk a lot about the story of Thomas Holmes when he came to Shakopee, but we actually know that when he came to Shakopee, he actually came because he had William Quinn lead them here. He is the one who actually knew where this area was, and the one in Tasky area where he said, here's the place that you might want to have a trading post. Here's one. He's the one who actually did that. And his wife was a Dakota Indian.
He led Pond here or Faribault?
Holmes.
Holmes.
Yeah. Bill Quinn, he was born in Coldwater Springs near Fort Snelling, and his mother was part Cree Indian. His father was Irish immigrant. And there's actually a map, here in 1837, and shows that Coldwater Springs and the Quinns are right here. So they were around. And actually, if you look at this picture here, here's just the fort in the background, and they lived along over here. And again, in the Shakopee story, it says, employing a half-breed, Bill Quinn, as a guide, Holmes ascended the Minnesota River and cooked a meal in a hollow near the old Indian village of Tinta-O-Tama. And that's in that red book, it says that. But it's interesting because afterwards, there are several other articles by Bill Quinn, and at least in his view of it, he was a little bit more in charge than Thomas Holmes. But Thomas Holmes probably had the money, I'm guessing. But we do know that Bill Quinn he had a lot of education. He married Angelique Jeffries. They had 3 children. But he could speak Chippewa, Dakota, English, and other languages. And he was a clerk, and he was a scout for the Army, and he was an interpreter. So he's quite well, but again, if you have the ability to speak more than one language, a couple or 3 or 4, you probably do quite well because they need that all the time. But there's an interesting story now. Bill Quinn was born in 1828. He died in 1906. But there's a funny story that I had to tell because here's another picture from when he was a little later in life. Buckle them up. All right, here's the story. This person actually, Newt, Steve, I can't say his last name, but he wrote this about this. He said, at one time along the winter came a half-breed from St. Paul. His name was Bill Quinn. He had $1,700 encased in his pocketbook. He came into my saloon often and treated the crowd, no matter how many there were or how few. He would just throw down a $5 bill on the counter and he didn't want change. He said sometimes when I would give him change back, he would throw it on the dirty floor and trample on it. So he learned after a while to please him and never give him change. And this pleased him terribly. So that's just interesting, but man, keep going because I kind of like Bill Quinn. All right. So Bill Quinn at one time brought his son and his son's sweetheart with him. They were pretty good-looking half-breed Indians. He said he had caught them wild on an island in Big Stone Lake and wanted to buckle them up and marry them. So he bought 10 gallons of whiskey, 10 gallons of cherry brandy, and I was invited. The person, Newt, said I was invited to the wedding. That sounds like a fun wedding, huh? They said that Mr. Queen was in such a hurry that he sang out between drinks, "Buckle them up, buckle them up." And then again he would do a jig and laugh. And then when it was all done, Quinn said he was so glad that they were buckled up. We had a good time at the wedding, the most pleasant and jolly time I have never enjoyed. So that's Bill Quinn, who was really part of the beginning of the next generation of people into Shakopee. It's sad because they don't, you don't have a statue about Quinn, but he was really quite interesting.
No Quinn Street.
And there's no Quinn Street, right? That's another thing that I get mad about. But well, anyway, that's a fun one. Now, Jane Lamont Titus, we talked a little bit before about her. I'm just going to do this one again because I just like her so much too. Jane Lamont Titus moved to Shakopee about in 1847. Now you have to understand that Jane Lamont Titus, her father was a trader, but he died early on. Mother was a Dakota Indian who was pretty well known all the way back, okay? But when Jane Lamont was probably around, I think about 13 years old, she only spoke Dakota. She was her mother brought her to Samuel Pond and Gideon Pond, the brothers in Bloomington, and asked for them to raise her from now on, okay? And there's a whole discussion about this because people are like, well, why would you give up your child like that kind of thing? But it actually was a whole process, and I remember after that, I read in a newspaper from Lewis, I can't say her last name right now, but anyway, she said the fluidity of family comes from Indian tradition. This has always been a part of active life, this ability to hand over a child to a sister or to someone else to raise for a while if you're having trouble. And I think that's really what happened. So anyway, she ended up living in Bloomington, then moved to Shakopee. So for 13 years, she was back and forth between those two places. She only spoke Dakota, but eventually spoke English also, okay? And actually, Cordelia Eggleston Pond, which is Samuel Pond's wife, she talked about, in a letter, she said, we had a teacher for our Indian school this winter of our own training. She does very well, I believe. She came to live with us about 7 years ago, and has lived either in our family or brothers most of the time since. We think she gives good evidence of piety. Okay. So, Jane Lamont Titus is an interesting person, just Jane Lamont as a person. But she ended up eventually married Moses Starr Titus, who is the nephew of Samuel Pond. Okay? And they ended up having 4 children. This is the first 3 boys, and then they finally had a girl. Okay? And this picture is probably about 1860. But what's interesting about her, Jane Lamont Titus was an interesting person because, now I have to think of the year, but it's not going to pop up, but anyway, at some point, there's a whole bunch of land. Remember, because once the Dakota left, there was land there, and everybody wanted the land. It was about 50 acres, including like Memorial Park and beyond, that whole area, right? There's about 50 acres, and so 3 people came into town in Shakopee and went to the person and said, I want the land, okay? The first was Moses Starr Titus, which was the wife of Jane Lamont Titus. He went in, told his story, he left, he went home, okay? Thomas Holmes, remember Thomas Holmes? Some people used to say the grandfather of Shakopee, even though it's already been there for a long time. Anyway, Thomas Holmes did the same thing, went in, he wanted the land, okay? And then Henry Hines. And Henry Hines, remember, was a newspaper reporter. And all 3 wanted the land. But while Moses left, these 2 went to a place across the street afterwards, and the 2 of them got into a fight. I mean, like a big fight. As in, like they said that at one point, Henry Hines grabbed Thomas' hair, you know, and then he punched him, and then it was back and forth and back. It was really bad, apparently. So finally, the person at the store told them to get outside. So they went outside into the streets in downtown Shakopee. Huge group of people are all around watching this fight because it was they said it was bloody and they were just fighting, you know. So it was going back and forth, except for one person. Jane Lamont Titus was there. And while everybody else was cheering this one and cheering this one, she just kind of watched. And then Jane Lamont Titus took her script because she was part Indian and they had taken her land. So she had the script. She walked in, gave it up, and she got the land. So it's kind of interesting because all those 3 people were like really fighting the whole thing. She's the one that ended up getting the land, which is just kind of making a good story. And it is a true story too. And it's actually in the Shakopee story and it's other ones too, but it's just a good story. Okay. And Jane is buried in Valley Cemetery here in Shakopee, which is where the Casey Hall is, right next to that. That's where it is. And that's her. She's got a little small one, and then there's a giant one for Moses, so you know how it works. And then we'll talk about another quick one here. Okay, on the bank shooting. This was Charles Manaige, I think, what we just talked about earlier. Okay, he was I think he was 82 years old at this time. This was in 1929. He's part Winnebago, and he married Liza. He was part of the Civil War and the Indian War. He was 82 years old. And he was strange because he was 82 years old. Other people were with cars now. He was still with a horse and buggy kind of thing. And he would bring his kids to school at St. Mary's, and then he would go into downtown Shakopee. And he arrived and he found out that there was a robbery happening at the First National Bank on the north side of the First Avenue. They said that people arrived there, 3 people, they took $1,700 and tried to escape. And they ended up being caught. No one was hurt. Although several cars in First Avenue were shot at, and several cars had flat tires. What's interesting is that when it was happening, in the wagon was Charles, and he went up and down the streets while the shooting was going on, yelling to people, "The bank is being robbed, get your guns." And all these people came with their guns, and they were all there, so it was really interesting that it happened. And so after this, they ended up having a parade, and he was the, I don't know, Grand Marshal, I think they call it, anyway, with his wagon, just because that's his story. And that's what he ended up looking. That was about pretty close. I think it was a couple of years after, and then he died right after that. All right, last one I think we have for today is John Shoto. He was born in 1798 and died in 1899. I like this picture. It's hard to find, but there are a few good pictures up here. But he's an interesting person also. He was born in Wabasha, and he was there for about 25 years, and then he joined the Red Wing Band for 15 years. And let's just set a picture. So then he joined Little Six here in Shakopee. After the U.S. Dakota War, he became a scout with Sibley from 1862 to 1870. And then in 1872, he returned to Shakopee as the chief of the band here in Shakopee. And he was smart. He used to stop, and this is a very common thing. He would stop at houses of rich people and ask for food. You know, if he's hungry, stop, you know, whatever. If the housekeeper was there, they would fill him with all his food, you know, and he'd be happy. Okay. But if the woman of the house, the rich person came, he would look very disgusting at them, and he would give him just 2 pieces of bread and a little more. Okay. So Shoto would then point to his throat and gesture that he had a sore throat, and that he would leave. So he never got the bread, and then he would know that he could go to another house and he would find some good food. That's a smart guy. He ended up, he was baptized in 1895 at St. Mary's Church, which is interesting. And that's a picture from him as he's walking along with his sticks, you know, going through.
He does look rather disgusting.
Yeah. And in the beginning of January 1899, he used to walk around town, just peer out. He was almost couldn't see anymore. And he would say how, which was really a greeting he gave. That was the Dakota word for hello. And then shortly after this, in January, he ended up dying. And he was 99 years old. And his wife, Anna, survived him and died at age 90. And I know that if you go into the Valley Cemetery, there's a tombstone of Carolyn Moore, who was died as an infant, which is their daughter. And she was buried in the Popper Field. It's also interesting to me because right next to that is where Dan Eddings, who was the African-American person who lived in Shakopee and died in Shakopee, was buried also in the Potter's Field, so right there. Okay, so then just quickly, because we're just out of time, but just so you know, you want to learn more about the Dakota or about Indians, there is this weekend is what we used to call the powwow, okay? And it costs $10, and it's kind of really interesting and fun. And you sit and talk to the most interesting people. I find I just walk up to people. I hate doing that, but I do it anyway.
Hey, if
Yeah.
you're a senior, it's free.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know if the counts, you have to be 65?
60.
60? I still got a few more years.
Well, I'm not telling you for you.
But that's good to know, yeah, that's really good to know. And then finally, just, there is a building that's being built in Shakopee. This is just what it looks like. I've seen other pictures too beyond this, but it's just really pretty. But I just want to let you know, it's a mission to interpret and encourage traditional Manaige Dakota culture, heritage, language, and history. Okay, and it's going to be it's a pretty big building. There will be exhibit space, library, media center, artifact, storage area, and they will have regular stuff going on there. And eventually, when it first opens, I think in 2019, I think is when it's going to open. Eventually, first it's going to be just for the Dakota, for the first few months, and then I think it's going to be open for all of us. So, and it's a great way to learn.
So is it gonna be where the hotel and all the stuff is over there?
It's on
Canterbury Road.
Canterbury Road, in the same area. Yeah, they're building it now. You can actually walk and see that. And finally, I just have one thing. Remember Henry Hines we talked about before? You look at his book that he wrote, and he says that in Tintotama includes the filthiest, most ignorant, and laziest of the numerous tribes of savages that inhabit the North. And I bring this up because you look at some of the newspaper things all the way through, and this amazing kind of racist thing that happened. But you have to understand, he probably wants the land.
Yeah.
And so, he's like, these people are no good. But I just want you to know that there are people like that and some still more. If you want to know more, ask an Indian. I'm not an Indian. I can't tell you much except what I'm reading and talking. I've been with some people at the tribe, but I do think so. Okay? And finally, what is the date today? Today is the 14th of August. Was anybody born on August 14th? 15th? 16th? 17th? 18th? 19th? 20th? 21st? 22nd? 23rd? 24th? 25th? 26th? 27th? 29th? He gets the book. There you go. So you'll get a book. Okay? And again, the books are available in back also and other information. And could you put the lights up a little bit for people too?
Don't forget about the thing next September 13th.
Oh, and remember again, thank you, I forgot that too. September 13th, we're having our second annual
Pathways of Ŝakpe.
Pathways of Shakopee at Turtles, or near Turtles. It costs $40. It's a way to, we're earning money to make more signs for downtown Shakopee. So if you're interested, I have tickets, you may have tickets,
Yeah, but get
others probably have tickets.
There's dinner, silent
Or you
auction,
can
live auction,
or you can call. So just, to be.
presentation by Dave there.
Oh, and I will present it. Something,
Yeah.
I don't know what, something.
Dinner, live auction, silent auction, working on some other stuff too, hopefully.
Okay. All right, any last questions before we go? Okay, and if you have other questions, you can feel free to come up also. I was about to that time. And there is a list of what's coming up somewhere. If you don't have